Crack open the Arizona green tea, fire up a bowl of your dankest nugs, and get your Ray-Bans on as we dip our toes into the ocean of post-music and the first true internet music genre. Welcome to the WEIRDNET. Many weird and wonderful things have been born from the world of Tumblr. Most of them at least vaguely pornographic, and almost all of them involving cartoons, although there have been exceptions. While the opiated beats and hypnagogic haze of Vaporwave undoubtedly have their roots elsewhere, the so-called micro-genre itself appears to have crystallised via Tumblr before shattering into a multiplicity of sub-genres on sites like Last.fm, Bandcamp and Turntable FM. From the sounds of shopping malls, elevator music, and often obscure 80s pop, the producers of Vaporwave chopped, stretched, looped and reversed chunks of audio to create fuzzy, soporific soundtracks for imaginary worlds. Influenced by the dreamy sounds of shoegaze and chillwave, shards of melody, misheard lyrics and pitch-shifted vocals are used, while looped beats drift in and out over sedated synthesizers. In its beginnings, Vaporwave offered nothing new musically and based itself largely on samples of existing material. A modern digital audio workstation such as Ableton Live, Fruity Loops or Logic provides unlimited options to manipulate and mash up any sounds you can throw at it, and producers of Vaporwave often push them in creative ways to produce these weirdly nostalgic, experimental dreamscapes. Only later did artists begin bringing their own compositions to the fore, utilising production techniques and synth emulators to imitate the sounds of their influences and give their original works the same retro dirt of their progenitors. As we'll see, the influence of Vaporwave wasn't limited to the world of music. An obsession with Japan, Web 1.0 imagery and, bizarrely, Roman busts and bottled water were all smashed together as part of what became known as the Vaporwave aesthetic. While it began as a satirical take on hipster culture, it would go on to inform everything from the fashion scene to MTV, eventually burning out like all internet phenomena as soon as it came into normie space. Largely regarded as a joke and panned by musicians and critics alike, Vaporwave broke new ground in many ways and has gone on to spawn its own offshoots, most of which have gone on to be considerably more popular than the scene which birthed them. So let's take a closer look at the internet's first musical genre and how it all came about. Some place the birth of Vaporwave around 2011 with the release of New Dreams Limited by Laserdisc Visions, but I would argue that its roots lie a little earlier in 2010. The timeline's a little murky here, as we could feasibly say that the genre began, at least in terms of its musical content, with the release of Chuck Person's Echo Jams Volume 1 in August of 2010. Chuck Persons was the alias of experimental artist and electronic musician Daniel Lopatin, whose name I hope I'm not butchering too much here, who had been active as Oneohtrix Point Never since 2007 and had already received critical acclaim for his previous projects. Influenced by the chopped and screwed subgenre of hip-hop, as well as the harsh, bleak soundscapes of the noise scene, Daniel took chunks of 80s pop music and looped it, processed it and mixed it down to produce what he referred to as echo jams, heavily edited and manipulated sounds, looping over and over through sheets of reverb and delays to create nostalgic, almost hallucinogenic flashbacks to dreamy childhood memories. The techniques were far from unique, and there's always been a craving for the analogue warmth of the 80s and modern electronic music, but Lopatin's cut-and-paste reworkings of well-known pop songs of the era created these weird hypnotic tracks that seemed to capture something in people's imaginations. It wasn't just the music either. The artwork for the album itself referenced the early 90s Sega Mega Drive and the, at the time, groundbreaking game Echo the Dolphin, a weird combination of music and puzzle games involving dolphins, sonar weapons, and other stuff. To be honest, I never got past the first level, so I have no idea what happened next. But either way, it was a big deal at the time and represented a certain era in gaming technology for many. That nod to the past, both musically and visually, created a unity to the whole project that would go on to inform the entire genre of Vaporwave. By mid-2011, some within the musical community of Tumblr, inspired by a meme generated by a little internet, had begun to combine a peculiar aquatic aesthetic with vibrant pinks and blues under the name of sea-punk. It basically started as a joke, but was gradually actualised by creative artists looking to explore new inspirations, taking the sounds of the ocean and combining it with the laid-back beats found in chillwave and other, more sedate electronica. Closer in style to trap music and underground hip-hop with a hint of 90s dance, sea-punk was appropriated by the mainstream surprisingly quickly before being utilised by artists such as Rihanna and Azealia Banks. Its appearance in Rihanna's 2012 performance on Saturday Night Live effectively killed the genre as I've said, whenever an internet phenomena comes into contact with the everyday mainstream, it tends to lose its power and melt into the background again, replaced by the next fad. As I've mentioned, the timeline gets a little murky here, as sea-punk was technically still developing when Vaporwave came on the scene as a subgenre in itself, so there is some crossover involved that complicates things a little. Some refer to the work of Daniel Lopatin and some of the output of the sea-punk movement as being proto-Vaporwave, but I would suggest that, particularly in the early days, most artists outright imitated the Chuck Persons album before branching off to create their own sounds. This isn't meant as a criticism in the slightest. We all imitate our influences until we learn to walk for ourselves, and the same applies in any endeavour, but I think it's important to acknowledge the influence of what came before. The term Vaporwave itself was coined in late 2011 by producer WEIRDNET, who was himself responsible for the Internet Club and Echo Unlimited projects. It's a play on the word vaporware, which refers to a product advertised and marketed, but never actually released, such as the 90s Sega VR, which was advertised but never actually went into production. Symbolically, it was seen to represent the empty promises of capitalism, and the music attempted to convey that same detachment and lack of inherent meaning. It satirised corporate culture, taking its symbols and trademarks and turning them into a mockery of themselves, as artists such as St. Pepsi took 80s pop and smashed it together with 90s McDonald's advertisements. Further reinforcing this anti-capitalist stance, some attribute the term more to the words of Karl Marx and his waves of vapour, but either way, it effectively stood for the same thing, a rejection of the empty promises of capitalism. But back to the beginning of Vaporwave. For the sake of convenience, we'll take the generally accepted time frame of July 2011 and the release of Laserdisc Vision's New Dreams Limited as the starting point for true Vaporwave, as this can at least be confirmed independently. Laserdisc Visions was the work of musician Ramona Andra Xavier, an Oregon native who played a massive role in the creation and development of Vaporwave and produced many of the essential titles within the genre. With New Dreams Limited, Xavier produced 27 tracks of chopped loops, dreamy soundscapes and hypnotic grooves, all combined with artwork referencing the 90s Sega Saturn and the Japanese culture that would come to influence many future Vaporwave albums. A prolific artist in their own right, Xavier had been releasing music since 2005 and is active under numerous aliases, a common practice for Vaporwave artists, but is perhaps best known for her Vectroid and Macintosh Plus projects, both of which have provided landmark releases in the genre, particularly the Floral Shop album, which could be considered a perfect example of Vaporwave at its peak both musically and visually. Shortly after the release of New Dreams Limited, visual artist and composer James Ferraro released the now classic Far Side visual. Coming from a background in conceptual art and drone music, Ferraro brought a new density to the sounds and combined them with a performance art installation to create a unique take on the similar, ironic source material to that used by his peers. Originally planned as a series of 16 ringtones, yes, ringtones, as in like crazy fucking frog and all that bish. The project was intended to provide musical still-life snapshots, exploring the idea of background music in games, translated into real life and bringing influence from noise music and the avant-garde. As highbrow as the concepts may have been, there was still humour in it as it poked fun at easy listening, elevator music and corporate mood music, taking samples from them and turning them into soundtracks for imaginary shopping malls. Inspired by the works of Xavier Ferraro and Lopatin, more and more artists under more and more pseudonyms built an entire musical movement based on reworked loops of everything from elevator music to obscure cheesy pop tracks from Japan, gradually incorporating elements of the C-punk aesthetic into their visuals and creating a recognisable identity that would be mocked and applauded in equal measure. Taking the neon glow and skip caps found in C-punk and combining them with influences from the mid-90s computer systems and early 2000s internet, Vaporwave incorporated the flavours of E-Asia circa 1995 in its weird full-width text and Japanese characters to produce an easily identifiable overall look that would become as important as the music itself. Vaporwave was born online, not from any one specific location, and grew from sites such as Bandcamp and Turntable FM, where an active, vibrant community still exists. It is unique in that no other musical genre can be truly said to have been created exclusively online. But Vaporwave only existed on the internet until much later in its development, when a handful of small independent labels began to release tapes, CDRs and the occasional vinyl. In this respect, it stands alone and has allowed for other electronic subgenres to be taken more seriously by a much wider audience. Through online music critics such as Anthony Fantano of The Needle Drop and his review of Macintosh Plus's Floral Shop, Vaporwave gradually seeped into the mainstream consciousness and established itself as a legitimate musical genre. While it undoubtedly does draw criticism for many reasons, not least of all the lack of originality in much of the material, it's become a movement in itself and, as we'll see later, has spawned many a diverse and suitably weird release, as well as creating an entire artistic aesthetic. An aesthetic can be defined, amongst other things, as a set of underlying principles specific to a particular artist or artistic movement. In Vaporwave, aesthetic as a word is largely used to take the piss out of hipsters, but also relates to the overall look and style of material within the genre. In this case, typical aesthetics involve Japanese lettering and video game consoles from the 90s, juxtaposed with classical artworks such as Greco-Roman busts and statues. While seemingly obscure at first glance, the Vaporwave aesthetic actually speaks volumes about the philosophy underlying much of its output, with each item being a symbol in its critique on modern capitalism. We'll go more into this in a moment, but it's sufficient to say that the symbols such as Fiji bottled water and Roman busts represent more than just random images thrown together for the sake of it. The use of the word aesthetic itself in Vaporwave seems to have largely come from the Macintosh Plus album Floral Shop and the track originally written in Japanese text, translated as Lisa Frank 420/modern computing, that came to be referred to simply as aesthetic. Given the pretentiousness of some within online and underground music scenes, always trying to be one step ahead of the pack and looking for the next new thing, Vaporwave provided a unique, distinctive package for the wannabe hipster. The early visual styles of Xavier and Lopatin, drawing on 16-bit gaming and the cyberpunk wonderland of Japan, came to inform all future releases until an actual, real and unique aesthetic was created. The visuals reflected the music in its weird, fractured and displaced movement. As more artists began to produce videos for their material, or in many cases see fan-produced videos uploaded to YouTube, it became typical to see clips of 80s and 90s advertisements and infomercials, glitched up and chopped, just like the music, and set to well-known tracks from the ever-increasing Vaporwave catalogue. Using source video from the past allowed artists to reinforce that nostalgia encouraged by the music, bringing the listener into their audio-visual dreamscape and bringing the genre to a whole new level. Another big factor in the rise in popularity of Vaporwave came from creative artists setting, by then, classic tracks to more unexpected video clips. While not the first to do so, Lucien Hughes is arguably the best example of what came to be known as Simpsons Wave, where Vaporwave tracks are set to loops from old episodes of The Simpsons, typically chroma keyed, with hypnotic backgrounds replacing the originals, tinted with a dreamy purple hue, and softly distorted to create a weirdly comforting, nostalgic experience. Other artists before and after Hughes did use similar combinations, but his work, in my opinion, provides a good balance that others don't quite get. That dreamy purple hue, to me, encapsulates the vibe of Vaporwave overall, casting a lucid dreamlike haze over the visuals, saturating and distorting them like an old CRT monitor would, and conjuring up memories of the past. These pastel tones and neon highlights form another part of the overall aesthetic, recalling the late 80s and the early days of online communication, while also projecting a futuristic, globalised cyberpunk wonderland. Something else unique to Vaporwave, which we've already mentioned, is the inclusion of Japanese text and, through its influence, the use of full-width characters to alter what would normally be half-width text. Since Asian scripts are typically larger on a computer screen than the Western Latin script we're used to, computers can display two English letters where only one, for example, Japanese character, would normally be seen. Using full-width formatting on English letters causes that peculiar spacing typical of Vaporwave titles and references, and can be replicated online with ease. Some artists chose to use Japanese text exclusively, obscuring their identity and sometimes claiming to be from far-flung places, far removed from where they lived in real life. Others, particularly as the genre developed and fragmented, tended towards a more westernised approach as their material evolved over time. This Japanese influence wasn't simply some superficial weeaboo appropriation of a foreign culture. Like everything else within the Vaporwave aesthetic, from the fuzzy audio chopped and mangled into tracks to the images of bottled water and 80s graphic art, it symbolised something deeper and had meaning beyond its basic appearance. Vaporwave wasn't just rehashed loops of Chris de Burgh, bucket caps and bongs. It was satire, and it took a swipe at corporate culture, using its symbols against itself by reframing them and creating a new context. While many Vaporwave artists just made music for the sake of it, certain people within the community sought to project a more political message through their art, lashing out against what they saw as the failings of capitalism and consumerism. Vaporwave, unlikely as it may seem, has been referred to by some as being something like the modern-day equivalent of the punk movement of the 1970s and the early 80s. I know that this might seem absurd to some, but look at the overall picture. It's essentially a DIY thing, with individual musicians creating and releasing albums on their own, just as artists on the tape scenes used to. The way in which the sound is manipulated also owes much to the world of industrial music and the work of acts like Throbbing Gristle and Non, both of whom rose from the world of punk and subverted corporate materials for political and artistic ends over the course of their careers. There's also a similar underlying political theme involved too for many artists, railing against commercialism and capitalist systems in the same way the punks did 40 years ago, but again in digital form, and with an audience far beyond what their forebears could have imagined. There's a reason why Vaporwave has been referred to as chill wave for Marxists, as many of the artists involved are vehemently anti-capitalist, but they use the symbols of their enemies to parody and mock them in their faces. As we saw in the previous section on aesthetics, certain symbols are consistently used within the genre that are often assumed to be random. To better understand how the whole picture comes together, we'll take a brief look at some of the major symbols used and what they mean within the context of Vaporwave. Japan, its culture and its language figure highly in Vaporwave, but not simply as a nod to technological advancement or due to an obsession with hentai, although no doubt that figures in it somewhere. In the 80s and 90s, Japan was seen as this futuristic wonderland to those of us outside of it. All neon lights, giant television screens, and technology far beyond what was available to us at that time. During that time, it was believed by many that Japan would eventually take over the world due to their growing wealth and position as a global leader in many fields. Some imagined it as a Blade Runner-like neon dystopia, symbolic of all things related to globalization and the growth of technology into unknown areas. Taking this idea further, Vaporwave took Japan as a symbol of all things commercial, capitalist and globalistic before projecting out this odd alternative reality through their art. Perhaps one of the most visited themes in Vaporwave and its 2013 offshoot, Mallsoft, is the idea of shopping malls and the architectural spaces involved. Like Japan, they've come to symbolise commercialism and 80s consumerism, capitalism in a confined, empty space where the entire environment is designed to make you want to spend your money. A common feature of shopping malls and larger superstores is the presence of generic, bland background music. You know exactly the sort of thing I mean, especially if you grew up in the 80s. That soft, anonymous jazz, usually a reworking of some pop song at the time, playing almost subconsciously in the background. The same was typical of elevators in certain places. These weird little musical backdrops to everyday situations by unknown artists, found on obscure K-Tel compilations from decades beforehand. Vaporwave would take these musical scenes as source material to be chopped and looped into hypnotic, dreamy tracks, echoing in the reverberated spaces of an empty shopping mall somewhere in the past. In juxtaposition to the futuristic chaos, it's common to find classical pieces of art, such as sculptures or busts on Vaporwave artwork. This seems to have originated with Macintosh Plus's Floral Shop, but it's seen time and time again after the release of that album. By mixing classical art with crap 90s desktops, neon grids and oversaturated pastels, it creates a clash of high and low art in the same way that Vaporwave takes disposable pop music and turns it into experimental soundscapes. Seeing the head of a Roman god positioned at an odd angle over an image of a beach or a city in a fluorescent pink backdrop creates a certain dissonance. Unsettling and surreal, but very distinctive, and a trademark of the whole genre. Bottled water, usually Fiji or some sort of so-called artisan water, or wanker's water as I like to call it, appears quite a lot too, but actually and perhaps surprisingly, symbolises quite a harsh critique of capitalism. At the moment, a large percentage of the world lives without access to clean, safe water, and people die every minute due to this. To those of us fortunate enough to live in the West, things like bottled water, often overpriced and purchased purely as a status symbol, are luxuries that we take completely for granted. By using fancy bottled water, Vaporwave is poking fun at the greed and the lack of appreciation so prevalent within global capitalism and the movement which accompanies it. We can afford to buy something that we can, in most places in the Western world, safely get for free and we don't think twice about it. Some kid in some shithole country, starving to death and drinking parasite-infected water doesn't have that luxury, but we take it completely for granted and it's something that we can change. But anyway, enough of my soapboxing. There are other recurring symbols, but these are the ones you'll mainly see in relation to Vaporwave, and all of them basically convey a similar message to varying extremes depending on the artist and their intent. Some, perhaps even most, Vaporwave artists use these symbols ironically rather than to make any sort of statement, but some of the founders of the genre are keen activists and did genuinely feel like they were sending out a message with their recycled works. Not being hugely involved or interested in the capitalism versus communism debate, I don't want to stray too far into this, as I don't want to misrepresent the artists involved. While I may not agree with some of the underlying politics, it's fascinating to see activism in art again, and it does lend weight to the whole digital punk argument for me. Vaporwave effectively peaked around 2013 before being absorbed into the mainstream through things like Drake's Hotline Bling video, which took influence from the genre, at least on the aesthetic level. During its time as a living, breathing thing in itself, it birthed dozens of artists of varying quality and varying output levels, some releasing only one landmark piece before either vanishing or reappearing under another moniker with another album. As we've seen, Vaporwave was the first internet-born genre, but it didn't take long for it to shatter into a million pieces, spawning or inspiring its own so-called micro-genres. Some of the originators of the style went on to take the genre further, such as Saint Pepsi, who would go on to reincarnate as Skylar Spence, popularising the future funk offshoot, a more disco-influenced take on the same woozy, dreamy sounds of Vaporwave. Artists like Xavier continued with her numerous projects, expanding out into art installations and inspiring her own fitness goth aesthetic, which would go on to become popular in online subcultures. Some would go on to take things in a far more extreme direction musically, such as the relentless but weirdly hypnotic hard vapor, a more GABA and hardcore influenced style with much faster speeds than the laid-back grooves of its forebears. Given the already satirical nature of the genre as a whole, it wasn't unusual to see parodies, piss takes, and outright mockery of Vaporwave. We've already briefly looked at Simpsons Wave, which was a fairly short-lived offshoot, but did a lot to spread the sounds of Vaporwave into mainstream consciousness and popularised a handful of artists from within the scene. Vaporwave had started out with a rather Marxist flavour and maintained its political connections through its lifetime, especially through artists for whom the genre was a form of activism and protest. Arising from opposite ends of the political spectrum, other politically charged subgenres such as Fashwave appeared via YouTube in response to the more socialism-tinged original releases of Vaporwave. Adopting the aesthetic but overlaying, as the name suggests, fascism-inspired images such as Nazi marches or speeches by dictators, Fashwave has all the hallmarks of a trolling movement that's using shock and disgust to get attention. There is no doubt people who genuinely believe in that sort of bullshit, but I would argue that they're the minority. Most, like anything remotely connected to Paul and 4chan, is just shitposting to get a rise out of people, and they clearly do. Certain media outlets have tried to connect Fashwave with another, almost certainly comedic offshoot that developed from Vaporwave around the same time. Trumpwave basically takes the original ideas of Vaporwave and mashes them together with video and samples of President Donald Trump, creating these weird, dreamlike sequences. As I said, it's almost certainly been started as a joke and probably by the same people involved in the Great Meme War, but it's an example of how the overall methods and techniques could be applied to random source material. That ease of production through software like Ableton Live inevitably led to countless copycats who just thoughtlessly threw loops together and tried to cash in on the popularity of the genre. While some of the artists involved created genuinely good music through simple recycling and rearrangement of older tracks, the majority created boring, empty garbage that served as one-play background music for gamers and nothing more. Due to the DIY nature, anyone could set themselves up as a Vaporwave artist, upload a chroma keyed video to YouTube and get themselves a Bandcamp or a Last.fm account. There is and was plenty of free software out there that would allow anyone interested to try their hand, but few had the ear to pull it off, and even fewer brought anything new to the table. Vaporwave itself, even after it was proclaimed dead, actually continued to evolve as artists started adding their own instrumentation, bringing VST synthesizers as well as real instruments into the mix and giving the genre something of a new lease of life. Rather than recycled loops, original compositions appeared that emulated the fuzzy warmth of an 80s vinyl. Whether through instruments or audio manipulation, each sought to replicate those dreamy vibes but create something unique rather than rehashed. The overall aesthetic has been absorbed into popular culture, Just as C-punk was, and just as almost all internet phenomena eventually is, whether it's Rihanna or Young Lean, they all owe a debt in some way to that flash of sleepy brilliance that existed briefly before burning out. Now, the genre does still technically exist, and subreddits, forums and sites exist to discuss the ins and outs, but it's still kind of viewed as a joke by many, and the genres it inspired have gone on to hold the attention of the public far more. I've only mentioned a few artists specifically in this video because, to be honest, there's just too many to cover, and most of them use multiple aliases anyway, so it would take too much time to tie all the threads together. I don't believe it would achieve much anyway, as anyone interested in finding out more can easily find lists of recommendations from better informed sources than myself. For the moment though, it's sufficient to say that rumours of the death of Vaporwave have been greatly exaggerated. If anything, it's evolved into a whole new series of beasts, and made history by being the first ever non-localised, internet-based musical genre. Most people I know can't stand Vaporwave, but I quite like it for the nostalgia and the creativity of some of the artists. True, the majority of it is shite, but there's the occasional flash of gold in the heap of turds that a YouTube search for Vaporwave will provide. I tried my hand at it, and it's definitely not as easy as it seems to make a good track. It's easy to throw together a load of loops and samples, but to make a coherent, interesting track out of it is another story, and where most wannabe producers fail. I've only really skimmed the surface in this video, as we could go into so many aspects of Vaporwave that it'd take hours, so hopefully this has given at least a basic overview of things and provided you with a few leads to go exploring should you wish. Something I find interesting about Vaporwave is the speed with which it rose and fell. I've mentioned before how things seem to be developing faster and faster all the time, and given that musicians and artists often sense future developments more quickly than others, it's intriguing to see how Vaporwave existed so briefly. Other musical movements have lasted years, even decades, but Vaporwave came and went within maybe a year, leaving behind a huge catalogue of material and creating its own musical offspring with future funk and the rest. Perhaps the rapid peak and collapse of the genre reflects something in the way we'll see future artistic, political, social and economic systems rise and fall, with only the most effective practical aspects remaining. Rather than taking years, maybe we'll see it happen in months. Who knows? But it's an amazing and terrifying time to be alive, and I await tomorrow with bated breath. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video and that you'll like and subscribe if you feel you would like to. I very much appreciate the continued support, subscriptions, suggestions, feedback and criticism. I know you're all busy people with your own lives to lead and that your time is precious, so please know that I really sincerely mean it when I say thank you, and I really do appreciate it. Join me on Twitter, GAB, Minds and Facebook to keep in touch, and I'll speak to you soon. Keep your eyes open for the forthcoming weird streams, which I am still trying to execute properly. But until next time, keep it weird.